Tonight, a spike in walking pneumonia across Canada.
I have diagnosed more pneumonias this season than probably the last 3 or 4 seasons combined.
Highly contagious and infecting young kids, hard to spot but easy to treat. What you should watch for. Kamala Harris calls out Donald Trump's violent language targeting Liz Cheney.
This must be disqualifying.
Plus, we break down what a win for either side means for Canada. How some home buyers are getting thousands of dollars back when they close.
This would really help us with the mortgage.
The legwork that could get you cash back.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hennemanson.
A warning from doctors across the country tonight. They're seeing a rising number of cases of walking pneumonia, and parents in particular need to be vigilant. Toddlers are being infected at unusually high rates. It's not a new illness, but right now more people are getting seriously sick, and not just here. A similar spike has been spotted in the U.S. too. It can spread easily, especially during the school season, and it can hit anyone of any age. Jennifer Yoon with what doctors say to watch out for and how to treat it.
Big breaths in.
At this Ontario emergency room, this doctor is seeing more cases of walking pneumonia.
I have diagnosed more pneumonias this season than probably the last 3 or 4 seasons combined.
The bacterial infection usually doesn't wipe you out. That's why it's called walking pneumonia, and symptoms are similar to most other respiratory viruses.
There's fevers and chills and cough. Those would be the obvious one. Sometimes there can be chest pain associated with it. Specifically to atypical or walking pneumonia, sometimes there's GI symptoms, so nausea, vomiting.
But the most vulnerable can get serious complications, and more Canadians than usual are getting infected. Quebec and British Columbia have seen a rise in cases. And one Halifax hospital says it's already seen more than 100. Last year, there were just 11. In Newfoundland, a mask mandate is back in health facilities, partly to stop the spread of the bacteria responsible for the illness.
We're trying to get ahead of the surge of respiratory illness.
There's a spike in cases in the U.S. too, most notably among kids between 2 and 4. Those kids rarely get this type of pneumonia. We don't know why there's a spike, but doctors say it is highly infectious, and people can be contagious for weeks before they show symptoms.
If somebody has mycoplasma in a household, you can expect 1/3 of the household to get it.
Antibiotics are effective, but patients need the right ones. And those don't include the standard penicillins, like amoxicillin.
Well, that's an excellent antibiotic. It doesn't work for mycoplasma pneumonia. We use a different class of antibiotics.
Doctors say there's also a good chance your immune system will be able to fight off the infection on its own. But if you can't seem to get better, or you're having trouble breathing, the message, don't wait. See a doctor. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
Nova Scotia's premier is now apologizing to a woman who was forced to pay tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket for surgery. As CBC News first reported, her fight with the province and debilitating condition left her so despondent she applied for a medically assisted death. Angela McIver now in the legal victory that's forcing the province to pay.
You want a bone? Sit. Sit, pups.
For Jennifer Brady, these little moments mean a bit more now that she has hope, but she's not quite ready to exhale.
Part of me feels like, how do you celebrate a win when the battle has cost so much?
A Nova Scotia Supreme Court judge sided with Brady, who was denied out-of-province care for a treatable condition so debilitating she applied for a medically assisted death to end her pain. The decision stating Brady and another woman in a similar circumstance were treated in a procedurally unfair manner, and it was unreasonable. Brady was first diagnosed with lymphedema in 2019 after having cervical cancer. At 46 years old, the chronic condition causes pain and swelling in her legs and confines her to a massage machine 5 hours every day.
And that is what now I spend a lot of my time doing, is trying to manage that swelling in my legs, the swelling and the pain in my legs.
A doctor recommended surgery, a procedure the province covers, but it's not available in Nova Scotia. She applied to have the surgery out of province, but was denied because she didn't have a referral from a Nova Scotia specialist. It turns out there is no such doctor in the province.
When are you going to fix health care for me?
Brady took her battle directly to Nova Scotia's Premier Tim Houston, crashing his election campaign kickoff.
Look, there's work to be done in healthcare for sure.
Houston's tone changed following the court decision and issued an apology.
On behalf of the province, I want to apologize to them. No Nova Scotian should have to go through what they went through.
As a single mother with 2 young children, Brady has a lot at stake. She remortgaged her home to have one surgery in Japan at a cost of $65,000. But the next surgery, she can't afford. Brady says it was the demoralizing fight with the province that pushed her to apply for a medically assisted death.
I almost killed myself. So I'm not really sure how to go forward yet. I think I'm still processing that the battle's over.
Now, concerning that MAID application, it still remains in limbo for Jennifer Brady as she tries to figure out what are the real possibilities for treatment moving forward now.
And Angela, you've been following Brady's case for months, and we're seeing a real shift here from the Premier.
That's right, Ian. So in addition to his apology, he has also ordered the Department of Health to reimburse both women for all expenses. That includes the surgeries, the travel costs, as well as legal fees and interest. And he's also asked the Auditor General to review the entirety of out-of-province care in Nova Scotia and what changes are needed moving forward.
Angela McIver reporting from Halifax. New York City Mayor Eric Adams' corruption trial will get underway in April. He pleaded not guilty to federal charges of accepting bribes and illegal campaign contributions. Adams says he'll still run for re-election next year. Donald Trump is responding to accusations that he threatened a political rival with violence as the U.S. presidential election campaign enters its frantic final few days. Richard Madden is in the critical swing state of Pennsylvania, where both sides are focused on swaying every possible vote.
Kicking off the final weekend in one of the closest elections in modern U.S. history are new accusations of violent threats against political rivals.
The man is angry.
Kamala Harris says Donald Trump is fanning the flames yet again.
In great detail, suggested rifles should be trained on former Representative Liz Cheney. This must be disqualifying.
She's referring to what Trump said at a campaign stop Thursday night in Arizona, where he lashed out against Cheney, the former Republican congresswoman who's endorsed Harris.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
Trump's campaign says he's referring to Cheney pushing the country to go to war without being able to handle a battle herself. He's also boosted calls for her to face a military tribunal for treason. Cheney responding, "This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death." Trump repeated his claim at a campaign stop in Battleground, Michigan.
She wants to go kill people unnecessarily, and if she had to do it herself and she had to face the consequences of battle, she wouldn't be doing it.
In this final sprint, both campaigns are targeting the crucial Rust Belt states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. The so-called blue wall, Democrats hope to retain, Republicans hope to break.
I've known her for 2 decades.
Harris's latest campaign ad, blanketing airwaves across Pennsylvania, features its popular governor, Josh Shapiro.
Do you want more chaos? Or like me, are you ready for some common sense? That's why I'm with Kamala.
That choice agonizing John and Marianne Zarina. They're among the few rare undecided voters who told us they'll make their choice at the ballot box.
I think Trump is a great businessman, maybe not a great politician, and I think Harris needs some more practice.
I think that's who he is, and that's, he flies off the handle a lot, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so reluctant.
Now, both Harris and Trump will be here in Pittsburgh holding dueling rallies Monday, the day before the election. Another clear sign that the road to the White House cuts straight through winning Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it feels like we've been saying this for months now. It continues to be true. Pennsylvania, critical for both campaigns.
Yeah, it sure has. And we're seeing in these final days confidence from both teams. The Harris campaign says that their internal data shows that independents are breaking their way, while the Trump campaign says their numbers show that they're poised for a big win. So it's going to be a nail-biter this election. And of course, Pennsylvania, the big prize of the key swing states.
Richard Madden in Pittsburgh tonight. And we will have special coverage on election night. Join Adrian and me next Tuesday as the votes are counted. Coverage beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern, wherever you watch CBC News. Ontario is trying to crack down on vehicle thefts by proposing new legislation aimed at fraudulent vehicle identification numbers.
It's these types of activities that, despite seeming like almost victimless crimes, are driving carjackings, late-night robberies, and chaos in communities throughout the province.
Criminals use a VIN, often from a comparable vehicle that has been totaled or registered in another province. Then they apply it to a stolen vehicle. If passed, the new offense would come with up to $100,000 in fines and up to 6 months in jail. A community in rural BC is in shock after police seized nearly $500 million of drugs and ingredients for making fentanyl. This is a record-breaking bust, and Susanna De Silva explains another sign of the sophistication and ambition of criminal gangs.
The idea that this quiet small town was home to Canada's largest drug lab has come as a surprise here.
Pretty low-key little village. There's not lots going on. It's quite quaint and relaxing, actually.
It's really sad that something would be happening on our doorstep, right beside a kids' camp.
The major police bust happened in BC's interior, Falkland, home to just 900 people. Kevin Evans runs a Christian retreat next to it.
Lots of expansion, it seemed like, cement trucks and loads of lumber, and you knew things were happening.
But he couldn't imagine what.
I cannot understate the sophistication. Sophisticated by virtue of its size, by virtue of the type of equipment and the setup.
5,000 liters of liquid and 10 tons of powdered chemicals were seized, enough to make 95 million doses of fentanyl, with a value of close to $500 million, according to police.
To me, that's a sign of the fact that they've been allowed to practice and continue without much interference from law enforcement.
Experts say what was found also shows a high level of cooperation between criminal groups. Police say it appears the lab was using a drug formula new to Canada, but used in Mexico.
So we have this image that organized crime is mostly people killing each other and not cooperating. The reality of modern organized crime, particularly around illicit traffics, is that they cooperate constantly.
Experts also say it's hard to know what effect, if any, busts, even this large, have.
The void is so easily filled because there's such a significant demand for the product.
One person has been charged, and more charges are expected, along with a cleanup bill police believe could be over $500,000. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
Saturday has been declared a day of mourning in Serbia after a concrete roof collapsed at the entrance to a train station, killing at least 14 people. Dozens of rescuers raced to comb through the rubble with heavy equipment looking for survivors. The collapse happened just before noon, seemingly with no warning. The building was recently under construction, but officials say that section of roof wasn't part of the renovation. And anger is growing tonight in Spain after devastating flash floods killed more than 200 people, the deadliest natural disaster in Europe in decades. And as Chris Brown shows us, residents say they were caught completely off guard.
As people in southeastern Spain assess immense losses, hundreds of thousands are struggling to clean up after being inundated with mud. Essentials like drinking water are non-existent in many places, and so the grief at so much loss is often eclipsed by fury at local authorities.
And anger because it's outrageous that, you know, our local government didn't do anything about it, knowing they well knew that, you know, this was coming and did nothing about it.
Much of the town of Godelleta outside Valencia was swept away. The third time in recent years, that many have had to deal with floodwaters. They blame local authorities, who they say let homes be constructed in dangerous areas. My wife and I don't want to live here anymore. It's already a nightmare, said Antonio Molina. Even after 3 days, rescuers are struggling to reach everywhere people may be trapped. And as teams push deeper, they're finding more bodies. The truth is, the magnitude of this event is devastating, said firefighter Jose Marie Blanco. These are now Europe's deadliest floods in decades. Hundreds of Spanish soldiers have been deployed, searching parking garages in the hopes of finding people still trapped in their vehicles. They're being aided by thousands of volunteers from outside the disaster area who've walked for hours themselves to try to help. What happened here touched all of us, said David Munoz. From the air, the scale of the catastrophe comes into focus. With rescue efforts ongoing and more rain in the forecast, survivors fear this disaster is far from over. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Here at home, some asylum seekers are living on the streets after being evicted from hotels run by the federal government. They're given just 3 days to move out. As Lisa Xing shows us, in this housing crisis, it means for some there is nowhere to go.
Everything he owns fits in here. It's home for now.
It's very difficult, and the cold is coming. It's very cold at night.
CBC News is not identifying this man because he's afraid he'll be sent back to his country where he fears for his safety. An asylum seeker who came through Roxham Road from North Africa more than 2 years ago. He had been living in a federally run hotel in the Greater Toronto area, waiting for a decision on his asylum claim until recently.
I can't imagine this happened actually in Canada.
Following a dispute with his roommate, he was given this eviction notice saying he had 3 days to leave. The reasons: aggressive behavior and missing a meeting with immigration officials.
This situation, it's not fair. I don't know why you say for me I'm aggressive. I don't make any problem.
As for the 3 days notice, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada tells CBC News eviction notices related to aggressive behaviors are infrequent, and for the safety and security of others and staff, individuals are given short notice, generally less than 1 week. The federal government also says asylum seekers in its hotels can be evicted for a range of reasons, from violence to cooking in the rooms, missing a meeting, and breaking an 11 p.m. curfew. Though the decision is largely at the discretion of immigration officials, there is no set process, nor is there a way to appeal.
It is pretty demeaning.
This outreach worker says asylum seekers in government hotels don't have the same protections as others.
As a tenant, I have rights, right? This person obviously did not have the same rights, and this person should have had the same rights.
The short notice made worse by a housing crisis.
The crux of all of this is that there's got to be a better solution for housing refugees long-term than in hotels. It's a shame on the country that anybody lives on the streets, including asylum seekers.
As Canada grapples with the 7,800 claimants in hotels across the country, this one spending his nights in parking lots, vowing his family back home will never find out.
I can't say that for my mom or my father or my wife or my children. I can't say I'm in the street. I can't say that, no.
Lisa Xing, CBC News, Toronto.
Some realtors are trying to attract new clients by handing over a big chunk of their commission.
They do their own research, they look for their own properties.
What it takes to get cash back on your biggest purchase. Plus, a new perspective on the sex work industry.
This is labor. It's a job. You clock in and you clock out.
How movies are trying to be more realistic. And a class ring lost underwater in the 70s returned to its rightful owner.
Saw 3 initials on the inside, so immediately I was like, oh, there's a chance.
We're back in 2. The threat of a postal strike continues to loom tonight. Canada Post says contract negotiations are still underway with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, but a cooling off period ends on Saturday. With a minimum of 72 hours notice, workers could walk off the job. Some homebuyers are getting thousands of dollars returned to their accounts after negotiating a cash-back deal with their realtor. Nisha Patel explains why more agents seem willing to give up part of their commissions.
It's an excellent home.
When Mehrdad Kayeri bought his dream house in Toronto, he scored nearly $35,000 back.
I figured by using a cashback realtor, this would really help us with the mortgage.
His realtor earned 2.5% commission and returned a chunk of that to him. It's a perk for buyers who negotiate a cashback agreement.
With so many tools nowadays, online tools like House Sigma and MLS, my wife and I did the bulk of the heavy lifting.
All realtors earn commission when they represent someone who buys a home. Cashback realtors give some of that money back to the buyer. The amount of the rebate depends on the percentage negotiated and the price of the house. But with average selling prices in cities like Toronto and Vancouver topping $1 million, it can add up to a lot of cash.
Commissions are very rich, and I think it's a good thing if these things are negotiated.
Here's the master bedroom.
Many traditional realtors insist their compensation is fair and argue that smaller fees could lead to worse service.
Well, it varies across markets.
This real estate expert says doing your due diligence is key.
Make sure you kick the tires. I'd want to check, see how many transactions they've taken care of in the past year. If they have a lot of experience, I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
For cashback realtors, the model may be a way to attract clients at a time when home sales have slowed. Alex Kvitnitsky gives up as much as 50% of his commission.
It's a nice bonus to have when you get a rebate that you can allocate towards whatever thing that you want to spend your money on.
He says these days home buyers are often far along in the process by the time they come to him.
Buyers are now very, very savvy. They want to be a part of the process, and so they do their own research. They look for their own properties.
As the industry changes, his fees are changing too. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
A newly released award-winning movie is trying to reshape the conversation around sex work.
Showing all of that backstage labor that was always invisible before.
The real-life stories now on the big screen. Plus, 2 potential presidents, both with downsides for Canada.
The cost of living and inflation challenges will be made much, much worse.
What you can expect after all the votes are counted. And Toronto gets a cash infusion courtesy of Taylor Swift.
Swifties spend a lot, and they're coming from outside.
The National breaks down the stories shaping our world. Next. An estimated 150,000 people turned out in LA today for the World Series champion Dodgers. The team defeated the New York Yankees 4-1 in the best-of-7 series. The parade ending inside Dodger Stadium, where MVP Freddie Freeman and his family were on hand to celebrate. This is just one of the ways legendary Toronto Raptor Vince Carter is being celebrated in the city this weekend. Air Canada has decked out one of its planes in his honor. And Saturday, an even bigger honor, his number 15 jersey will be retired by the team. A new movie is reshaping how sex workers are portrayed on screen. Eli Glasner spoke with those trying to change the conversation and challenge the stigma facing the industry.
Well, color me happy. There's a sofa in here for 2.
Close your mouth, dear.
It's been 34 years since Pretty Woman painted a fairy tale picture of sex work.
I'd like you to spend the week with me.
Yo.
Now a new movie is taking a grittier look.
Hi, I'm Annie. Hi, I'm Annie. You don't have cash? Let's go to the ATM.
Honora is centered around a fierce performance by Mikey Madison. To prepare, she spoke with sex workers.
It was really interesting to see, or to, if I was shadowing someone at the club, to watch the way that they were picking up customers, how they were psychologically reading them.
There's so much to learn about a person in as short a period as an hour when somebody's getting naked.
Canadian Andrea Werhan went from working as a barista to stripping and escort work. When Honora's director slid into her DMs, she started consulting on the script.
He asked me, okay, you walk into the locker room, and what's something you might see? And I was like, well, you might see a dancer eating her dinner out of a Tupperware.
Let's go, come on.
No, I'm eating my food.
That's why you have Tupperware, keep things fresh.
I was like, yes! yes, because that's real.
Yeah.
She gets on the subway and she goes home. That's the life of so many of the people I know that do sex work.
This is labor.
This is labor. It's a job. You clock in and you clock out.
In these stories,
This author says for too long, sex workers were seen as tragic figures or villains, but it's changing.
they're showing the huge range of sex work professions, and they're showing all of that backstage labor that was always invisible before.
But in the real world, sex workers are still very much at risk.
We have folks that lose their housing. We have folks that will lose their status and get kicked out of the country. This is a very real reality that they do not have rights and agency and autonomy over their own lives.
Do not touch me!
The hope is the attention around Honora will help bring sex work out of the margins. Eli Glasser, CBC News, Toronto.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. Taylor Swift brings her Eras Tour to Canada for sold-out shows in Toronto and Vancouver. We'll break down the economic impact. But first, as the world waits for U.S. voters to choose a president, what Canadians can expect if it's Trump or if it's Harris.
I think we don't have time to panic. I think we have to start laying out scenarios around what will happen.
From tariffs to defense spending and beyond, the U.S. choice will reverberate here at home. Lindsay Duncombe drills into the policy differences and what they could mean for Canada-U.S. relations.
Just across the border, our neighbors are about to make a decision that will affect all of us.
The relationship between the United States and Canada is a very personal one.
I would not build a wall on the Canadian border. I love Canada.
Harris or Trump, predictable challenges or chaos.
Canada has treated us very badly. Canada was taking advantage of us, as usual.
Your cash is on the line.
There'd be a lot of short-run disruptions because businesses would need to find new suppliers, new customers, and almost surely a recession.
I wanted to find out what Canada can expect if Kamala Harris is in charge or if Donald Trump gets reelected. So I reached out across the border to two people who analyze this stuff every day. Terry Givens is a political science professor. She recently joined the faculty at the University of British Columbia. And Eric Miller is a Washington, D.C. based consultant. He advised Canadian governments and corporations on trade. Here are three things to expect under each possible presidency.
Starting with a return to Trump.
I'm going to put a 100, 200, 2,000% tariff.
The first big challenge, tariffs. Donald Trump has promised to impose at least a 10% tariff on all goods imported to the U.S.
There's been no sense that current free trade agreement partners will be exempted.
That means everything Canada exports to the U.S. would be more expensive, and Americans would buy less.
And with a huge adjustment cost. For Canada, whose prosperity depends on exporting, the introduction of significant new tariffs from the United States would cause a great deal of pain.
Economists at TD Bank crunched the numbers. Here's their baseline expectation for GDP in Canada over the next couple of years, growth around 2%. Now, watch it drop when you factor in Trump's proposed tariffs.
Other countries will be encouraged to retaliate. So what it likely means is that many things that Canadians are buying from abroad, not only from the United States, will get a lot more expensive. So the cost of living and inflation challenges will be made much, much worse.
Challenge number 2 under Trump, migration.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history to get the criminals out.
Donald Trump is promising to deport 11 million undocumented people from the United States.
What kind of pressure would there be on the Canadian system if that deportation actually is implemented?
Oh, I think they'll be huge.
Givens says Canada could expect more people trying to come here, both legally and illegally.
There's going to be people who want to leave the U.S. and go to Canada. And if that influx increases dramatically, I think it's going to be important for Canada to start thinking proactively about ways to work with other countries. How are we going to manage this flow?
The third challenge under a second Trump presidency: defense spending. NATO countries are supposed to spend 2% of GDP on military and defense. Right now, Canada spends about 1.29%. There's a plan to get to 2% by 2032, but don't expect that timeline to satisfy Trump.
Canada is not seen as pulling its weight, and it will become really fundamental that Canada does come to be seen as pulling its weight if it is to build this kind of positive relationship with the Trump administration that it would like to see.
So what about Harris? If she wins, the change won't be anywhere near as dramatic, but there will still be challenges.
Right off the bat, Canadians can expect trade disputes with the Harris administration. Get ready for a familiar fight over milk and cheese. The Americans want access to Canada's dairy market.
One can count on the fact that dairy will be a top demand for the United States toward Canada.
Also, a Harris administration would push back hard against Canada's digital services tax aimed at U.S. tech companies. The second challenge under Harris, that pressure on defense spending won't go away.
You know, I think that a Harris government is still going to say, hey, Canada, we want to see you get up to that 2% in NATO, but they'll be much more supportive of NATO.
Givens says a Harris administration will be concerned over Russia and China's influence in the Arctic and expect Canada to pay up.
This is just going to be a very hot issue for Canada going forward.
And if Harris wins, there could be an impact on Canadian politics. A Harris victory could send a message to federal Liberals about what can happen when you change leaders at the last minute.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think there are already a lot of emboldened Liberals who are speaking up, but I think a Harris win would show that it can be done.
We have an opportunity in this election to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump.
As close as the race is, we may not know who wins the election for a while.
I think we don't have time to panic. I think we have to start laying out scenarios around what will happen and start looking at what are the carrots and what are the sticks that are needed to be deployed in order for Canada to be able to effectively navigate this period.
Both Miller and Givens say Canadians should be patient. Their advice? Plan for both possible presidents and wait.
As we wait to see which of the scenarios Lindsay took us through becomes reality, a note on early voting data. It shows more than 64 million ballots have already been cast. In Texas, while elections may come and go, the oil industry keeps pumping away. But now there's a new frontier: clean energy storage. International climate correspondent Susan Ormiston looks at what's driving an energy transformation.
On the outskirts of Fort Worth, Texas, the future of electricity. Banks of mega-sized lithium-ion batteries ready to meet a galloping demand worldwide for electrical power. So these batteries take electricity from the grid when demand is low and store it here. And then when demand spikes, like with heat waves or cold snaps, they can push the stored electricity back into the grid, making it more stable. This facility, owned by Eolian, can store up to 100 megawatts of electricity and deploy it in seconds when the grid is under strain.
We have just had massive numbers of batteries coming online in Texas. And that level of growth is, I think, projected to continue for at least a few more years. And it's really exciting.
Texas, the beating heart of oil and gas, is also charging ahead on renewable energy with wind and solar. Battery storage is the next critical piece.
So this is the energy storage facility.
Tim Nelson with RWE shows us how power from the company's wind farm can be captured and stored in the battery banks.
We're either going to charge the batteries from the wind farm or we can charge them from the grid.
Underground cables can transmit power from the batteries to a transformer and then the grid, even when it's not windy.
See, since it's all underground, it doesn't impact the land use around here where the land's still actively farmed. You know, Texas itself is #2 in the nation in energy storage. It's the leading renewable energy producer in the whole country. oil and gas and wind aren't one or the other. So, we're continuing to develop the wind projects, and we're seeing the demand from the customers for that wind, solar, and energy storage.
The International Energy Agency says energy storage needs to grow 6 times what it is today just to meet climate goals.
I do think they are helping to address climate change. We are able to address grid resilience issues in a way that allows grid operators to add cleaner generation to their fleets and continue to reduce the carbon impacts.
But oil and gas still rules in Texas. And when Donald Trump talks, they listen.
Drill, baby, drill.
Assuring oil and gas producers their interests will be protected if he's returned to the White House.
The majority party here in Texas is the Republican Party, and the narrative is oil and gas good, renewables unreliable, or part of some Green New Deal.
Reid says there are campaigns in this political cycle to discredit renewables.
We are seeing a lot of what I'll call individual dark money that's going into campaigns that are aimed at fighting individual projects, so renewable projects, and especially battery storage.
But any chill is not deterring investors. Texas expects to nearly double its capacity for energy storage to 11 gigawatts this year. By comparison, Canada has just over half a gigawatt.
I won't speculate on the actual results of the election, but what I will say is that it's not necessarily the politics itself that's going to drive how this goes forward. It's the demand. We're continuing to see the demand increase.
So in West Texas, pump jacks and wind turbines coexist for now.
10 days from now, Azerbaijan will host the Global Environmental Forum COP29. Among its significant agenda items, increasing battery storage capacity. The Taylor Swift tour is getting closer to Toronto, and so are nearly 500,000 fans.
What really struck me about this is what a complete takeover it was.
How other cities handled the excitement. Taylor Swift's Eras Tour is almost here. First up, 6 sold-out shows in Toronto. But Swift doesn't just draw fans to a venue, she brings a lot of money into the local economy. So what kind of returns can we expect here? Andrew Weir is with Destination Toronto, and Michael Hecht is from Greater New Orleans, Inc. And Michael, let me start with you. Taylor Swift just finished 3 shows in your city. In terms of economic impact, put it in perspective for us compared to other big-ticket events you've had, like the Super Bowl.
Well, if you look at the total economic impact and add up the ticket sales, plus the hotels, drinks, all the other ancillary spend, you get very close to $500 million, which makes it, in terms of direct, immediate economic impact, possibly bigger even than the Super Bowl. So it's something pretty extraordinary in terms of what the city and the state are feeling on an immediate basis.
Andrew, I'm going to come to you next, but first I want to listen to an official from Toronto and what he had to say about economic impact.
On the economic impact, 3 key points I'd like you to take away. 1, this is a lot of visitors at 500,000. 2, they're each projected to spend a lot of money. The evidence coming out of other cities that the per capita spending for concert goers is above $1,300. To put that into context, the per capita spend for delegates to our major former tech industry event Collision was $1,228. So Swifties spend a lot, and they're coming from outside. So it's new money into our economy.
So Andrew, your organization, Destination Toronto, did an interesting thing. So you excluded ticket prices because not much of that money stays in the city. So that aside, your estimate is that these concerts are going to create $282 million in economic benefit. That's an estimate. Does it look like you're going to probably hit that?
Well, it shows you overall just the power of these kinds of major events in terms of driving money into the economy. And you heard Pat Tobin there from the city just talking about that a moment ago, talking about it drives net new spending, hundreds of thousands of visitors that spend money on hotels and restaurants and those other things that Michael was talking about as well. But that's new money into our economy. So it didn't start the day in our economy, but it ends the day there. And then even after the visitor's gone home, that money continues to work. So money you spend at a restaurant, the restaurant then turns around and spends that money on labor, on ingredients, on other services. So you go from about $150 million in direct spending to over $280 million in terms of the overall impact and what it brings into the economy.
Everyone who's going to be coming to the concert will have their own story, and here's one. Sarah Fournier is going to travel here with 3 others for the weekend from Montreal.
So I guess now the money I have to kind of gather up is for like the merch and just like the expenses for the weekend, which I have in a saving account. So it should be all good. But yeah, it comes from like summer jobs and just saving throughout the years. So gas, the ticket prices, which is not the cheapest either, but I would say probably like 500, 600 per person for the weekend.
Yeah, and keep in mind, in her case, she's staying with family, friends, so she's not paying for accommodations. A lot of people obviously are. Michael, based on your experiences in New Orleans with the Taylor Swift concerts, any lessons or advice for Toronto, and for that matter for Vancouver, that's going to have some Swift concerts as well?
Well, I think that what really struck me about this is what a complete takeover it was. Taylor Swift was ubiquitous. There was Taylor Swift coming out of restaurants, out of cars, out of people walking down the streets with mobile speakers. It wasn't a concert. It wasn't a show. It was an experience that the only thing I could compare it to is back in 2010 when the Saints won the Super Bowl. This kind of uniform joy and energy throughout the city. So I would say to everybody in Toronto, and I love Toronto. I used to live in Toronto. I actually worked out in Mississauga for a little bit, long story, but everybody should participate. Individuals should dress up. Restaurants should have promotions. Stores should have special events, because this is not just like having a superstar show. This is a chance for a city to have a collective moment of joy and catharsis.
And Andrew, picking up on that point, Toronto does have some events already set up. For example, I think a scavenger hunt. I've never heard of that before when a concert comes to town.
Well, like Michael said, it's about capturing that sense of fandom, right? That sense of passion. People are here, they want to experience. Yes, they'll either have tickets for the show, or many of them don't, frankly, that even come into the city. But how do we get them to go do more, see more, spend more in the city? So yeah, so we've created a Taylor's version of Toronto, a scavenger hunt essentially, that just encourages playing off her lyrics and her songs, try to get people around the city, try to get people moving around again, doing more, so that more businesses, more neighborhoods, more people throughout the city benefit from all of this momentum, all this activity, which is so critical to capture when they're here.
Yeah, pretty happy event, right? In these polarized times, I feel like in Toronto it's going to bring people together. Though, Michael, I may not take your advice in terms of dressing up like Taylor Swift. But anyway, Michael Hecht, Andrew Weir, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's been great. Never in my wildest dreams, to coin a phrase, that I think I'd be talking to Canada about Taylor Swift. It wasn't on my bingo card, but I'm glad it is. Have a great time. You'll love it.
Excellent. Next, a class ring lost in the ocean returned 47 years later.
The color of the gold, I guess it catches your eye like nothing else.
The deep sea discovery in our moment. You're looking at a McMaster University class ring from 1965, recently discovered near Miami Beach by Alex Davis. Turns out that ring was lost in Barbados 47 years ago. Its rightful owner now lives in Ontario, and Davis was able to get it back to him just in time for his birthday. Tonight, the return of the ring makes our moment.
The color of the gold, I guess it catches your eye like nothing else. You know, there were 3 kind of big flat rocks that were almost like they collapsed from the coral and kind of like dropped on top of it. And as soon as the sand cleared out the way and I saw the band, you know, it still looked as you see in the photo. I mean, all I did was give it some fresh water and just a light little scrub with a gentle toothbrush. I can see the 1965 McMaster University. Got home and kind of looked at it properly and saw 3 initials on the inside. So immediately I was like, oh, there's a chance. I messaged the university almost right away. The next day when they kind of followed up and said, right, here's the right person to speak to, Morgan replied and gave a little story and it all lined up and the initials all matched up. Called him up on his birthday and we had a quick chat and stuff. And yeah, he was obviously very appreciative and yeah, it's just good to do the right thing, obviously, you know.
This reminds me, and I hope my wife's not watching right now, but on our honeymoon, I took off my wedding band in the Caribbean under the water to see how, what would happen if I put the ring on the sand underwater. Turns out it sinks alarmingly quickly. Thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Ian Hannamansing in Toronto tonight. I hope you can join me for Cross Country Checkup and the National on Sunday. See you then.